Welcome to Melt University. This series will help you build your brand, inform you on a variety of career paths, and introduce you to top executives in sports and marketing. Now, here's your host, the president and CEO of Melt, one of the largest independent sports and event marketing agencies in the country, Vince Thompson.
Welcome back, students. Virtual Melt University. Believe it or not, we are rolling into 2021. It's still a crazy world out there. I know some of you are back on campus, back in class. Some of you are not. Some of you are virtual, but we do appreciate the cards and letters and the comments and the responses from you. We are going to have a tremendous 2021, tremendous guests. We've already had some tremendous guests that you've seen. Gary Stevenson of the MLS, Will Funk of Turner, AT&T, and today's special guest is a dear friend of mine and a rising superstar in the world. Going to be very, very inspirational for you to hear her story, as well as how she set an example for herself and you and others of how to use your internship programs and your college campus as the ultimate professional lab. But Emily Caron is a sports business reporter for Sportico. I first met her when she started writing for my dear friend Adam White at Front Office Sports, and she was focusing on NCAA business and college sports business. She went to Sportico. Prior to that, Sports Illustrated. Prior to that, worked her way through, as I did at Auburn, University of Virginia, even though her Cavaliers beat my Auburn Tigers a couple of years ago. I'm not going to hold that too much against her, but she worked with the Cavalier Daily, worked with UVA, worked with the athletic department, worked for ESPN and ESPNW. And I think it's going to be very, very inspirational for you guys to hear it. So, Emily, what an honor and pleasure, privilege to have you on Virtual Melt University. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Same to you, Vince. I'm excited to be here. And like you said, really worked my way through college there. So hopefully I can share some insight for your listeners.
Yeah, we really, Emily, we're encouraging them. And obviously it's a unique set of time right now, but, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but, where the college campus is the ultimate professional laboratory. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But, before we sort of dive in to a lot of craziness, I mean, first of all, what a insanity 2020 and what an insanity 2021. My boyhood idol, Hank Aaron, just passed away. Rest his soul. The Super Bowl, what the heck's going on with that? CFP, the Power Five, NIL, the pandemic, social justice, legal wagering. I mean, you hadn't been covering this. You've been in this game for just a few years, but and you're with an amazing organization, Sportico, and a newsletter that all our students should subscribe to, with the Penske family owning it. But have you ever seen anything like it? I mean, this stuff is just moving at the speed of light, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I swear probably 10 times more stuff has happened in the last 12 months than in any other 12-month span I've been in this industry.
Well, let me say this. I've been around a hell of a lot longer than you have. I'm probably your parents' age, but I can say the same thing. I mean, it's crazy out there. But as we unpack your podcast today, we're going to point out how many tremendous opportunities coming out of COVID. This could be the golden era for students of this generation and how they find opportunities in the sports marketing business. But before we dive in to things, we always sort of like to bring it back. And you're more closely in age than most of our guests to our current listeners. But where did your passion for sports and sports business and sports journalism, where did all of this form as a child? I know, and I just posted this, my very first autograph, I used to write letters to my heroes, and back in the day, they would respond. I actually have a personalized autograph from Hank Aaron that I just posted, and that was my passion. I love sports. I love to write about it. But where did yours come from?
Yeah, well, first of all, that Hank Aaron news obviously just happened a few minutes before we started recording this. I'm sure for you guys down in Atlanta, that hits especially hard.
We're devastated. We're devastated. I mean, he's such a kind soul. He was a Mobile guy, and I grew up near Mobile. So, I mean, I grew up on Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, I mean, were both Mobile guys. So it hits extra special home for me. And I would make sure that our summer vacation was to Atlanta to see the Braves play, to watch Hammer and Hank play every summer. So I'm really devastated today, honestly.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you have those memories to get you through.
Yep.
My sports experience. So I am actually one of 4 girls. So my dad.
Wow. Bless you. I want to meet your dad.
He was always looking for someone to tag along. He was a huge baseball guy, huge sports fan. I grew up in the DC area, so he was always looking for someone to tag along. I was the oldest, so I was kind of the easiest option for him. And he and my mom both went to Penn State, actually. So I remember we were little dressing up as Penn State cheerleaders, as for our Halloween costumes. We'd go up to games in Happy Valley, which talk about, the kind of consummate college sports experience. And that was sort of my introduction into sports fandom. So I grew up believing that all fans were as passionate as Penn State fans, and tagging along to Wizards games back in the Gilbert Arenas era. And, the Nats came to DC. Obviously we were O's fans before, and the Nats came, and we were loyal to the city and jumped right on that. So getting to kind of experience all that at a young age, I always had a passion for sports as a fan. And then when I got to college, actually, I knew I wanted to be a writer in some fashion. I didn't exactly know what that would look like, if that would be more creative writing, marketing, ad copy, whatnot, or actually, writing, reporting sort of stuff. So I just went to the Cavalier Daily, the student paper, and I said, hey, I want to get, involved in this. I don't really know where I fit yet, but what openings do you have? They had an opening in the sports section. They needed a beat writer and someone to sort of assist a couple other beat writers that they already had, who were maybe covering 2 sports or, had some conflicts in terms of scheduling. So I just jumped in, and I realized, hey, I actually really like this. I kind of combined my passion with something that I wanted to pursue professionally. And then I ended up, not being half bad at it. So I just stuck with it.
So your trek through Virginia. So by the time you had gotten out of Virginia, how many events did you think you had covered, and how many articles? Because what I'm driving at is you had a monster portfolio before you even set foot off of the campus of UVA. And I'm talking about the importance of, particularly now, Emily, how hard it's going to be in the job market, post-pandemic, because so many people are unemployed. They'll take a lesser job for a lesser salary. But talk about how well equipped and important it is to be well equipped coming off of your college experience.
Oh, Lord, I don't think you can understate the value of that. After I got involved with Cav Daily, I literally jumped at any other opportunity that was presented to me. They wanted to start delving into audio content. I immediately pitched a podcast, offered to host it, offered to produce it, started doing that. Wow. I got involved with the athletics department directly, doing in-game hosting stuff for them. They needed someone to run all of those little ridiculous games that you see during a halftime show. And I figured that would give me experience just in terms of speaking in front of people, being in front of a crowd, oratory skills, the whole thing. I did that. I started hosting a TV show that was locally produced by the athletic department. I literally just was a yes man in college. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I had a massive portfolio. Like you said, I probably covered or attended every single major UVA sporting event all 3 years I was there.
Wow.
And I was just on site, all hands on deck. I made some connections with some UVA alumni at ESPN and other places that I was potentially looking at internships for. So when they would come for game day, they would let me shadow, and I would just get to kind of see everything from the back end. So being a yes man obviously is not always the way to do it. And my sleep was definitely sacrificed, but A, I was getting invaluable experience, and B, I actually really enjoyed what I was doing. So I didn't mind it at all.
Well, we're going to talk about a lot of mentoring, a lot of relationship building and networking and all that. But talk about, because I see this a lot I hire so many young people, young kids and young students, and this was pre-pandemic, by the way, but they had an expectation that that they were going to be the CEO and have my job within 3 months. And they weren't willing to do a lot of the things that I still do and that you are doing and that you did and will continue to do. And then if they got in there in 2 or 3 months and they didn't like their boss, they would hop. And I couldn't even, you can't unpack any form of relationship in 2 or 3 months. I mean, personal, professional, romantic, business, whatever it is. But talk about your philosophy on doing what it takes. Be willing to accept anything. I mean, if my client wants a cup of coffee, I'll go get them a cup of coffee. And so talk about your philosophy on that and how important it is.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate in that I watched my dad works in finance and wealth management. And so his whole business was driven by himself, right? No one was sort of just handing him tasks to do. His whole career was built on him going out and meeting with clients. And like you said, if a client wants to if they want a cup of coffee, he was getting them a cup of coffee. He was continually networking and sort of selling himself and what he could offer, but then also having to back that up. And I watched him my whole life build his career himself entirely. It was all his hard work and it was all him being willing to kind of lay it all out there. And so I think when I was in school and was first presented with these opportunities, his motto was always just give it a try and just give it all you have while you're there. And I think I really took that to heart, especially after I graduated and even in my internship with ESPN in school. And then especially when I graduated, I remember watching him really grind, and he wasn't making millions of dollars when we were younger, and he wasn't reaping all the benefits of it, but he was working as hard as he could, which then I watched pay off later in his life. And I think I just tried to emulate that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, but you got to pay your dues, right? You're starting your career climb and you've had an amazing career so far, but there's no, I always say, hey, I'm an overnight success. It was just a long night. I mean, it's going to be as fast as things move. It's still just a giant grind out there. And so talk about the value and your strategy of relationship building and networking, because the environment I was in Auburn, I was driving Brent Musburger, Dick Vitale, Paul Feinbaum around Auburn, and I mean, I'm still good friends with Feinbaum. I'm on his show all the time and all this kind of stuff. But talk about your strategy and philosophy of networking and relationship building. We say that maintaining a relationship is like a flower or a plant. You got to cultivate it. The first two letters of relationship are RE, and RE are reciprocal. And people say, well, Vince, how do you maintain your relationship with Coach for 21 years? I go, I never take the relationship for granted. So you've obviously are very skillful at the relationship and networking, because you're already at the highest level of our business. So talk about your philosophy and strategy and share that with our students.
I think networking in general, like you said, is all about relationships, and relationships take effort, right? Whether that's a friendship, whether that's a romantic relationship, or whether that's a mentor or professional relationship, you just have to put in the work. But I think the other thing that I've learned is that you get more out of a relationship when you're not just reaching out to that person for professional advice, right? Like I always make a point of it a couple times a year just to check in with my mentors, and especially as a reporter now with my sources, to just say, hey, how are you? Especially during this last year, like, hey, how are you holding up? Hey, what's new in your world? Or, even just checking in and saying anything coming down the line, anything big happening in your world, that I can learn from, that I can learn about, that I can help you with, that I can support you through. I think those are the important questions. And, holidays come around, you say, hey, Happy New Year. How was your holiday? Just little things like that, putting in the effort, I think is crucial, because then when you do have those professional questions, or there are opportunities for them to loop you into something that they're doing, you're already top of mind.
Right. Don't you think that coming out of COVID, hopefully we'll get around it at some point, don't you think that there's going to be a higher premium on sort of empathy and understanding what your fellow human being is going through? Because you just don't know, particularly now that we're all masked behind these electronic veils and virtual and Zoom reality, I think there's going to be a big premium on empathy and understanding and really, but that will lead, I say goodwill is good business because we pivoted our intern program into a virtual intern program. We have thousands of kids in it, but don't you think that there's going to be a premium on that coming out of this?
Absolutely. I think if there's anything that I've taken away from COVID and last year is that personal relationships are incredibly important, and just being a human being first. And I think our editor-in-chief, Scott Soshnick, talks a lot about this. He's always like, when he talks about as an employer, he's like, I want to be a place people want to work. And that starts with making sure your people are taken care of. And I think that not only goes for your employees, I think that goes for anyone who's in your circle or in your tribe or anyone who's kind of even in the bubble that you aspire to be in,
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I think, and Emily, here's another litmus question that I'm throwing out for our students. And I think it's going to be a tremendous litmus for all of us going forward. One of the first questions I'm asking everybody that I'm interviewing for, for jobs and future employment and all these kind of things. What did you do to improve yourself or the life of others during COVID? It doesn't matter if you learned how to grow tomatoes and you delivered to a senior home or delivered Meals on Wheels, but that's indicative of the type of employee you're going to be. Don't you think that's going to be a new litmus for all of us going forward?
Yeah, I think kind of personal development is something that I've always tried to prioritize. I don't think that you continue to kind of ascend in your career or your personal life without work. And I think, I'm a huge reader, and as lame or as basic as that might sound, you can learn a lot from other people's experiences, whether that's a fiction novel or someone's memoir or a biography of someone that you admire, or even just someone you're interested in. I think I have continued to try and develop myself by learning more about the world and about others through reading. And I also think the more you learn about the world, the more you want to be in it. And I live in New York City now, and obviously New York City was very hard hit by COVID. And as soon as things started to get safer and it started to, cases started to die down and soup kitchens and stuff like that started to open back up.
Right.
I immediately started to go back there because, like I said, I was just consuming so much information about others outside of myself that I immediately wanted to go back and be part of that. And the more you're part of the world, it's a reciprocal cycle.
Right. No, I think you hit on the head. And so you talk about that you're a huge, I like the word vociferous. I'm a huge reader. I probably read, God knows how much I read. Kyle could tell you, because I'm constantly forward articles to the team and using them for repost and republication. But share, and not necessarily just the trades, because Sportico obviously is one of my go-tos every day. But if it's fiction or nonfiction or podcast, what are some resources that you would recommend to our students that they, go back and read? Like, I hear a lot of John Wooden's books. We hear a lot about Dale Carnegie, Norman Vincent Peale, and all that. But talk about your go-to resources from the past and then the present, whether it be, books, publications, periodicals, podcasts, or videos.
Sure. Before I got into the industry, before I graduated, I was flying through, Shoe Dog, Phil Knight, even just Moneyball. Obviously, those are very sports specific, but I think it allowed me to learn about the business I was entering into as well. So I would tell anyone, whatever facet of marketing, PR, sports reporting you want to get into, that finding people who have been in that industry and, in terms of past resources, just really kind of diving into those. I think presently I am a huge fan of podcasts. I think, whether it's while I'm on a run or taking a walk with my mask just to get outside my apartment for a little bit, there's a podcast called Second Life, which I am actually fascinated by. And it's a woman who is a CEO herself in the fashion world. And she interviews other people, predominantly women, about career pivots, women who started as one thing and now are doing something completely different. And I think it's really fascinating because similar to what you're doing, you learn a lot about where they started, where they went, but then how they pivoted and what they learned and where they are today.
I love that second life because, you know, we talk about, we're talking to a lot of people, not just college students and recent college graduates, but, you know, everybody actually kind of now has an opportunity to do sort of a reset, and they can
Right.
be who they want to be, and they can build their own platform. They can find their own audience. They can find their own niche. You never know if you're going to hit one person and then, you know, you start a movement or something within that niche. And one thing from my new book too, Build Brand New, wittingly or unwittingly, Emily was building her personal and professional brand every day she was on the campus of UVA. And you had a destination for that brand. And then when you were out, you had this monster portfolio. Talk about the importance to our students of really understanding the need to build their own personal brand, be authentic. It's okay to be authentic, but be careful, you know, what you post, because now you're kind of wearing all hats. You know, you're interviewing, you know, great people all over the place, but you're also interviewing people for prospective jobs and those types of things. So let's talk about the importance of that for a minute.
Yeah, I think, and you were kind enough to send me a copy of your book a few weeks back, and you talk a lot about authenticity in there, like you just mentioned, and I think that's really the crux of it. I think there are so many people on social media and on different platforms that it's almost overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
So you can't really try to be the right type of Instagram person, or you can't try to really have the right type of tweets. I think you just really need to find your niche in that sense. And I was very anti-Twitter, very anti-social media in general, actually, while I was in college. And then I realized when I started publishing my work that my work was a representation of myself. And so that I wanted to kind of control the narrative and make sure that people were starting to see that and see who I was and what I was about and what I could do. And so I started using Twitter more often as a professional platform. And that's, I think, when I got really intentional about my brand, quote unquote, because I realized that my Twitter portfolio then, or my Twitter page was going to be a portfolio, and that was going to sort of represent my brand and what I was about. And so I think being authentic in that is really important, but I also think being active in curating that is the other key. I think you have to be intentional about what you say and the messages you show, and, you know, how you represent yourself. Not saying to kind of curate how you represent yourself too much or to an extreme, but just making sure that the way that you are speaking publicly, and that, you know, that goes for the things you're putting on Twitter, represent the authentic version of you.
Right. I love that word, intentional. I think I love the word, and I use the word authentic, but I love that word, you know, intentional, and that's what we did is when, you know, kind of things hit the fan. You know, I'd always wanted to take the program Melt U virtual, and, you know, be able to share outside the walls of, you know, great people like yourself, because then even if I couldn't, you know, nobody thought about doing Zoom and those types of things even last summer, and so now the opportunity to have you on and share, you know, your wisdom and inspiration with thousands of kids has, you know, been some of the silver linings within that. But we also wanted to keep a forward face and a positive face in an industry that had just been absolutely devastated. The events industry has just been clobbered. I mean, we were heading into the activation of our 18th Final Four. So I said, hey, you know, we need to keep a forward face. We need to inspire people. We need to show people that we are a media company as well as an events company. But you know, Kyle and my team and I, we were very intentional on that. So I think that you kind of reinforce what all of us need to be. You need to be very intentional with your brand and what you stand for. You can be authentic. You can express yourself. But I do think, you know, kind of, and we also say, you know, you wittingly or unwittingly, because you're obviously very driven, you had a destination or an outcome very early on at UVA. And we tell our students, like, hey, figure your destination out based on your passion, but also know that this is not going to be a linear approach. I mean, life is going to be a series of you know, of ups and downs. It's not going to be linear. And even, you know, you coming out of school 3 years ago, you can already attest to that because you were at SI, then you were at front office, and now you're at Sportico. So talk about being flexible in your destination as well.
Yeah. So I always say, and I actually been talking to one of my sisters about this a lot. She's about to graduate in May, and she doesn't exactly know what she wants to do. Obviously, she has her major and she's been studying something for a long period of time, but she's not sold on that being her forever. And I always tell her that, where you start is not your forever. I think that was more true of our parents' generation.
That's a big statement. Yeah.
Yeah, I would know previous generations, but I think for, people who are coming out of school now, it's highly unlikely that they're going to stay in one career forever. They could even switch industries. They could completely switch paths. And so I think, and I even took that approach when I graduated school. I took the job at Sports Illustrated that was brutal. And you go back to kind of paying your dues. I was an hourly employee making barely enough money to live in New York City. I was teaching spin classes on the side. Just, everyone here has a side hustle. That's something I've also learned in New York. There's no shame in that. But I worked nights, I worked weekends, I worked whenever sporting events would happen. So for 2 years of my life, I was working Thursday night, 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., Friday night, 4 to midnight, Saturday day, 9 to 5 when college football was on, like just really paying my dues. And I realized I knew when I took the job that particular role at least was not going to be a long-term thing for me. But I knew that it was a fantastic stepping stone for where I wanted to get and what my end game was. And I was lucky enough, and who knows if what my end game was then or is still is today is what it's going to be in 10 years. But for now, at least I'm still on the same sort of path. But I had to be flexible in that, unfortunately, partway through my time at Sports Illustrated, they were purchased by an owner who sort of shifted direction. And I had to step back and say, okay, where do I want to go next, given all of this?
Right.
And sometimes that means leaving. And I was doing freelance work for a little bit in between before I landed something new, just because I knew that I had to be flexible in terms of defining my own future. I knew that where I wasn't the right path for me anymore. And so I stepped back and sort of took a risk and said, okay, I'm going to leave this because it was comfortable and it was still steady employment despite, the changes that were happening. But I just made a personal decision that was no longer the right fit for me. And I think you just have to understand that it's okay to maybe take a step that seems like it's a backward step because it could, land you two paces forward in the long run.
Right. I echo everything that you're saying. So talk about from the perch you sit, because you see it all coming across your desk. You see NIL, you see what's going on with Power 5, you see what's going on with NFL rights, you see what's going on with the legal wagering, you see how the pandemic has impacted the budgets of all these teams. You see, the new media rights deal. But where do you see the future the future opportunities for our students and our business? Because we've had a lot of great athletic directors on, and we've learned about, the mental health sector. We've learned about fanalytics. We've learned about data analytics. We've learned about fan experience and fan engagement. Where, for our kids on campus, where do you see these opportunities and what you're hearing about and where they're going?
Yeah, so I actually had the opportunity to speak with Alexis Ohanian a couple months back, who's co-founder of Reddit. He's Serena Williams' husband, and he actually is a fellow UVA alum. And we were talking about the NWSL team that he kind of was part of the venture capital funding that's coming to LA. And I remember I was struck in our conversation about him talking so much about tech in him discussing the purchase of a women's soccer team, or not even the purchase, getting the funding to start a women's soccer team in Los Angeles. And it was unique because he was talking about tech in terms of, some of the people who were involved in their funding. He was talking about tech in terms of how they were going to get involved in the community, how they were going to kind of be more than just a sports team, but also tech in terms of fan experience, tech in terms of ticketing. I think it really encompasses it. And I've seen that even in my own line of work. I know at Sportico, we have a reporter, Lev, who is absolutely fantastic, but he is a data reporter. And what he does is take numbers and information and data that we get and turn it into visual. And he does all of our coding and, creates these databases and these wonderful graphics. And so I think there definitely is going to be continued opportunity in industries that integrate tech into sports, into marketing, into PR.
Right.
And not necessarily, you don't have to be a coder. I know nothing about computers or coding, but, I understand the power of what my colleague Lev does. And I have worked, in any story that I can to integrate some of his work. And I can see when I'm reporting, tech is driving the NIL conversations. The NCAA is involved in all these conversations about how they're going to build the infrastructure to actually implement and monitor NIL changes. You talk about the companies, influencer, Open Doors, who are creating softwares to help student athletes. So I think it's, that's probably the obvious answer, because I think tech is probably changing how many industries function. But I think we've seen that particularly in our industry as COVID closed things down and teams are trying to find virtual ways to integrate sound into venues and to still, have virtual watch parties for fans. All of that is tech-based at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, trust me, I'm a poster child for trying to figure out how that all evolves, particularly with Coca-Cola and Aflac and all these people we represent. I mean, it's just it's crazy right now, and I do think the reason I'm so bullish on NIL, and I obviously know Blake real well at Open Doors and Jim so well over at Influencer and all the other guys, is that I'm just excited because I think it's the first virgin business opportunity in college sports in 50 years since the advent of cable or multimedia rights back in the late 70s and early 80s. I'm also, since I worked my way through Auburn Sports Information, I've been such a huge advocate for student athletes for 40 years. And so I think it's going to open up tremendous opportunities. But, Emily, I also think, we always focus on the Trevor and the Tuas and all those guys, but I think this is going to be giant boon and windfall for non-revenue and sports and teams and females. I've got a vision for bringing so many new companies in who want to attach themselves to these female student athletes because they stand for such empowerment. I think it's going to create a lot of diversity opportunities in there. And I counsel our students, like, hey, pay attention to what's going on in NIL, pay attention to what's going on in Congress and the Supreme Court and, the breakup of the Power Five and all those types of things. Because I think it's going to be a massive multi-billion-dollar evergreen opportunity from where you sit and where you cover. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. And I think, you have always been a vocal advocate in our conversations about what you were just talking about, NIL benefiting women and Olympic athletes and non-revenue sports. And I think what it comes down to at the end of the day is that all of those athletes have a voice, whether you're a Tua or you're a Trevor or you are, on the Auburn equestrian team. I know one of your favorite teams there.
Yeah, I love that.
Every athlete has a voice and every athlete has a platform today. And there are going to be industries and jobs that come out of that.
I'm so excited about it. I mean, because I've been, with these guys and ladies for, 4 decades. And I was just like, there's something out of tilt on this. And so I think it's going to be and I think it's going to be tremendous career opportunities because to your point, now so there's SEC Network, Pac-12, ACC, Big Ten Network, Longhorn Network, and all that. I mean, they've got these abilities to build these platforms and they've got these abilities to, to influence and then gain from it. But in closing this great conversation, a couple of questions put you on the spot. So far in your amazing career, who's the best, most fascinating interview that you've conducted so far?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I mean, you could don't say Vince Thompson. You put me in a separate parking lot. But all these great people. Who sticks out? Who stands out, and why?
So second to Vince Thompson would be. I actually did a profile piece on Dwayne Wade's personal photographer,
really,
Bob Medalis. I did that, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating because here was this person who sort of flies under the radar, who built an entire business off of an athlete's brand. Right, he was able to launch his career, which started as sort of a side gig for him. He was a friend of Dwayne. He was connected to him through his wife, and he had a full-time job and was sort of doing photography projects for him and, helping him kind of curate some personal memories through video and photography, whatever, as a side gig. And he ended up building a whole business off the back of that and getting all of these insane experiences with NBA players and new clients and new projects. And he actually was instrumental in the Dwayne Wade documentary that ESPN ended up doing. And I just thought his story was so fascinating because you could learn about business, about being an entrepreneur, about leveraging your connections, your network, but also just see his passion.
Right. I would not have expected the answer to be Dwayne Wade's photographer, but I have admired his work, and it's unbelievable. So in closing, if somebody's reaching out to you for advice, mentorship, relationship building, connection, possible employment, intern opportunities, what gets your attention when somebody reaches out? Because I know I have my pet peeves. We'll get a generic email with a generic resume, says, "Hey, I'm Joe Smith, and here's my resume, and I need to make X amount of dollars a year." I don't even open the resume because I'm like, you're showing me now what type of employee that you'll be, and because I'm not hard to find and track down on the internet, but so you're showing that effort, those intangibles, that audition, that first date. What stands out for you, and what gets your attention when somebody solicits you?
I think someone who's proactive, but I also think someone who knows what they're talking about. Right? Like you can tell when someone has done research on you and your background and your company and your clients and wants to be part of that and actually knows their stuff. And so I think that kind of goes back to this whole theme of like working hard that we've been talking about, is like you have to put in the legwork before you're just going to reach out to people. You have to know the people, know their industry, know where they fit in all of that, and then know where you could fit alongside them.
That's a good thing. And so because what I tell our students is seek out emotional cues, and ego cues. Like, it's not hard to find you. It's not hard to see what you've published. It's not hard to figure out that you went to the University of Virginia and those types of things. And if they are using those to soften the target, as I like to say, or leveraging those emotional cues, they're also showing you the type of effort and type of person that they would be when they reach out to you. And we say it's only as important as you make it. I mean, like you've got to put that effort in, and obviously you're on this monster path, and this is tremendous. And so, in closing today, we really appreciate your time and insight and wisdom. We hope you stay safe in New York, and look forward to breaking some great new hot stories for you soon in 2021. But Emily Caron, sports business reporter at Sportico, but obviously she's much more than that. Probably will run a major league one day, or a major media company one day, and hopefully she'll throw me a couple of scraps. We went to see the event business doesn't come out in 2 or 3 years here, come back out. But we do appreciate, just amazing, the path that you're on. I think it's going to be inspirational. You're going to hear a lot from our students. But, Emily, we really appreciate you joining our virtual Melt University podcast, and best wishes for 2021.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Vince. Always good to catch up.
Thanks, Vince. Hope you enjoyed today's virtual class. We'll be back soon with another edition of Melt University 2020.